Welcome to Impact Farming, where we introduce you to the people and ideas that will have a massive impact on your farming operation. Brought to you by Farm Marketer. Sit down, start the engine, and let's roll with today's show.
Hello everybody and welcome to the Impact Farming Show. Today I am so excited to have two amazing guests here with me, Gail Schafer and Jonathan Small from Global Ag Risk Solutions. Welcome guys.
Thank you very much.
I sat through your presentation here. We're at Advancing Women in Agriculture Conference in Calgary. And these two lovely individuals did a great presentation called A Seat at the Table. And we're gonna dive in, and I'm so happy to have you guys here and sharing your knowledge with our audience. So, are we ready?
Yeah.
Good. So you guys, you work with so many different parts of farming and farm operations, and you covered a lot of good, really good information in your presentation. Before we dive into that, can you speak to each of your roles with Global Ag Risk Solutions?
I'll go first.
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
I'm Gail Schafer. I work with Global Ag Risk Solutions here in Alberta. My role is to manage a team of salespeople from Highway 9 north up into the Peace Country.
Okay.
And we represent the company from a sales perspective, so we're out and about marketing this product, speaking to producers, really understanding what's happening on the ground. A huge part of my role is to coach my employees through what they need to do, help them to get a very solid education on the farm financial side as well as on the insurance side, and then work with a lot of producers. I spend a lot of time at kitchen tables as well with my employees. I did 100 kitchen tables last year.
Oh wow.
So my role is very much feet on the ground, managing this Alberta North territory.
Excellent.
And I love it.
Okay.
I'm Jonathan Small. I joined GARS actually just coming up on a year ago.
Okay.
It's been a long road. Actually, I've known the Global Ag Risk team since they began in 2011, and they developed their core product based around some of the stuff we were talking about today. So I've remained in touch and engaged, and eventually took the decision about 18 months ago, 2 years ago, I guess now, to leave Myers Norris Penny, where I'd been for 18 years, and come and join this organization and the great people that are in it. And now we're going to change the world. My role, my official title, Tracy, is Chief Research Officer, but it's actually a very broad remit that I have, and I think you summed it up very well, Gail. It's special projects. So anything new. I've done an enormous amount of training within the company in the last year. That's been a major focus, is downloading my knowledge, my 30 plus years of knowledge of the industry and how you look at farms and so on, to the team and make them better advisors and educate them. But literally I roam kind of far and wide in terms of the projects that I get involved with. It's mainly the company accessing what's got locked away in here over the years. So.
Nice. That's a great title, by the way.
It's quite a long time.
Yeah. Okay, so you guys delivered a presentation, A Seat at the Table, to a room full of women in agriculture, and there was some lively discussion. It was really, really a great presentation. Can you talk a little bit high level, and then we'll dive into some of the financial pieces, and then get to the seat at the table, joining the farm discussion. So do you want to talk high level about your presentation here?
Sure, who wants to go? Me? I'll go.
I started last time.
So I think the genesis of this was, as Gail and I began talking about it, was really what I'd spent the last decade doing at Myers Norris Penny, and I was spending more than half my time working with farm families on succession, and looking back, the 20 years before that, working with farm families both sides of the Atlantic, and they're really no different. And seeing how that's changed and how women's roles have changed in that time, and you look at 30 years and you can get some perspective on it. I think probably for many of the women who attended today, they don't have that perspective. They're in their own particular moments, and it's sometimes frustrating to think that, has it really changed that much? It hasn't changed for me that much, but over 30 years I've certainly seen that change. And it was when I first began succession planning, the women in the family, the daughters, the wives, the sisters, very often weren't at that table where we were talking about what was going to happen to the farm. That's completely changed, right? That was actually, and our approach changed too, right? That actually that was somewhat driven by the people at the consulting end of that industry as well, on the succession side, and making sure that all the stakeholders were there, whether they were going to be successors or not, right? It was important to have everybody's views and begin that process with everybody in the room, but also quite frequently the successor was a daughter or even a daughter-in-law.
Yeah.
And so that's changed, and attitudes have changed, I think, fundamentally. You know, there's a generation, those 50-somethings who are now talking about succession on their own farms were 60s children.
Yeah.
And their life experiences were completely different to their own parents, right? So their attitudes towards their daughters or their wives or their sisters or whatever, I think are a little bit different, just because, you know, that's a slow change over a long period of time, but now it's considered, you know, fairly normal. And I wouldn't say that it's not still overwhelmingly male. It is, and the successors are overwhelmingly male, but there's now females in those discussions, and very viable successors they are too, because I think the industry has changed in terms of the attributes it needs to succeed.
Absolutely.
And one of the conversations that we had very early on in trying to develop content was, what are the things that, whether they're male or female, what are the things that would make a succession plan flow more smoothly? What do people wish, what do succession planners and the older generation wish that the successors knew or had, or skills that are kind of needed? What makes a great successor? Mm-hmm. And that was a little bit of what informed how we put this together. What do we wish those people knew coming in? And so to try and make the people in the room, yes, they were all ladies and we're at a women's conference, but I think it's relevant to any successor.
It does, yeah.
What are the things that make that successor so much easier for the older generation to want to hand over things to and want to engage them? What makes them easier to have as business partners? Knowledge is something you can acquire, but attitudes and skills and ways of interacting are much more difficult, especially in a family sort of situation, to put, to transfer. So I think that was part of our conversation was, in starting to build content even, was what do we wish they knew?
Smart.
To try and help with that. Okay. So that was a little bit of it too, of where this came from.
Excellent. And that was a good segue right there. So why don't we dive into that? You guys, and now I can see it as you're saying it, what should somebody that is trying to run an operation or wants to be in a serious role on that operation, what information should they have? And that's what you guys shared today too, right? And the first one you guys spoke about was the 3 major elements of farm business management. And just so you guys know out there, some of this information is so intense, and we could do 5 episodes on each little piece. And Jonathan and Garz, they actually have videos on all these different topics. So if you guys are sitting at home and going, whoa, I didn't catch that, where can I learn more? What we'll be doing is including links to the Garz website where all this information is stored. And I know they have a webinar and they have a video series.
Yep.
Yeah. So don't worry so much about catching all the detail, guys. We'll provide you with that resource, but just dive in and listen to what Gail and Jonathan have to say about the important knowledge and the pieces that you need if you want to have a seat at that table. So 3 major elements of farm business management. Go.
So what we talked about were the gross margin and its critical importance and its impact upon farm profit.
Okay.
And farm profit is critical, right? If your farms aren't
Absolutely.
profitable, you can't do any of the other things. Forget about succession, forget about buying land and so on. So it is absolutely critical that we have profitable farms. So gross margin is central to that, and understanding what drives that. And then the cost of the operations, the cost of getting the job done. So that's people and machines and stuff like that, and a whole complex of costs there, which we call labor, power, and equipment costs, and the key drivers in there and how you manage those. And that's what we'll go into in more depth in the webinar that you can go and watch, or the video series and so on. And then the last category of costs, the land building and finance costs, which really trail along behind the other two. They're largely a result of the other two, but a tremendously important group of costs, right? So just three parts, just three moving parts that you have to get right. You need to be able to measure them, you need to be able to track them, and you need to understand how it is that you can influence them and so on. And those are the critical things to running a profitable farm business. And as I said, profit underpins all of the other things ultimately.
Okay, excellent. I'm going to ask you something, and I hope I don't catch you off guard with this. Do you have, and we don't need a for sure percentage, but when we look at farm business management, and I know, sorry audience, you hear me say this a million times, but producers are so busy, and in their presentation they actually did a few different word bubbles of the different roles on a farming operation, and often that's 1 or 2 people or 3 or 4, regardless. In a big corporation, that's like 20, 30, 40 people. So there's a lot of pressure on farmers to wear 40 different hats, know so many different things, and do all of those successfully. So I am curious on those pieces of knowledge that you just spoke about, and calculating gross margin and those very important things to successfully managing, knowing where your business stands and growing a business. How many farmers would know those equations? If, let's say you had a room, let's guess, you don't have to be totally bang on with this. We had a room of 100 farmers. How many farmers in that room would know?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, I think the number that would know their gross margin would be significant now. I mean, they don't all necessarily prepare a gross margin in the right fashion, so there's variance on that theme, and getting to some level of standardization on that is a goal of mine, and we've brought that about, right? So they have a pretty good understanding of the key elements in a gross margin, right? So on a grain farm, that's yield times price, seed, fertilizer, and chemical costs. And you can get into a discussion with a farmer and discover gross margins quite quickly from them, because they have a lot of that in their head. They may not have ordered it into a gross margin per se, but it's easy to teach. On the fixed costs, sadly, it's a very low percentage. Actually know what their actual fixed costs are. All kinds of hokey stuff gets done, and people use standard costs and things like that, and it's just awful, because it's super dangerous to use somebody else's costs as your own and not know your own. So it is the final frontier, and honestly, your gross margins actually are not that meaningful, except in the context of what your fixed costs are. So it's like trying to drive a car with one eye shut, right? We know that's probably going to end in disaster sooner or later, right? So you need to have the full picture. And so there's any number of gross margin consultants out there, right? Sexy and everything else. But the reality is you have to understand all three parts, right? To truly be able to manage that business.
Okay, excellent. And again, in those videos that we're going to link to, you walk through that information, right?
Yeah, so the video series in particular goes into quite a bit more depth about what drives them and how you manage them and so on. So.
Okay.
And from my perspective, being out on many, many farms and reviewing their actual historical gross margin over the last 5 years, and then talking about their projections for the coming year, oftentimes somebody in the farm will have an idea about some of each of the pieces. In some farms, they have no idea. But in many farms, somebody has a notion somewhere. But oftentimes, it's very unfortunate to see that not everybody that's at that table knows. Often the successor will not know those numbers.
Okay.
Often the partner will not know those numbers. And so I think when you say 100 people in a room, there are some folks who may know more. But I think in terms of the farm team who's managing the farm out there, I think the value would be so tremendous if more people managing a farm were much more aware of what those numbers are and what they mean for the operation's longevity. So that's my 2 cents. I
like
see
that.
many
Yeah.
people, and I sit at many kitchen tables in all over Alberta, and it would be wonderful if more people were more familiar with their own numbers, because it gives them control.
Yeah.
And decision making can be made using proper information. People might want to make the best decision possible, but if you don't know your margin and what your costs are, how can you make a great decision as to what's going to be impact your profitability on the farm?
Excellent point. And you think of different farm operations and different dynamics, but if everybody knew that, let's say a lot of people go into making management decisions, but only one person's taking care of those financial numbers, that is a lot of really important missing knowledge for those other individuals, where they're going, oh gosh, we need a new combine because blah, blah, blah. And then the financial one over here is the one going, whoa, wait.
No, we can't do that. We're not making any money.
Yeah.
Well,
We're already not making any money.
yeah.
Right. But then this individual over here that maybe is in charge of fields, he doesn't know that, so to speak. I mean, there's so many different variations and situations on farm families. It's so hard to talk about it, but that's a good point.
We have some where they've made a decision to buy another sprayer because they like being the first finished in the district. I think that the conversation turning to we'd like to be the most profitable in the district would really inform a different type of decision making. And I think knowledge of your own business is key to making those types of determinations for sure.
Excellent. Okay, so that is some good stuff. Now, there's so many different areas we can go with this. And again, they covered so much in their presentation. And without diving into each of those parts, which I really just encourage you to get those videos that Jonathan's done and dive into it there. I think I want to keep it a little bit more in the direction of a seat at the table, okay?
Yep.
You guys are here and you delivered this presentation and it was great, and there was some great discussion with the farm women out here in so many different situations, right? It was great to hear. Why is GARS here? Why is Global Agri-Risk Solutions here? And why are you guys taking part of this conversation?
From my perspective, I think it's tremendously important to get more involvement from the women in agriculture, because it's an audience that's maybe underrepresented in decision making. I think it's an audience that you were pointing out the demographics of who visits your website. Things like that are troubling, because we do have a kind of a 50-50 representation of men and women out there in terms of the numbers, but in terms of the participation in decision making, even when we go out to visit farm families to talk about their risk management strategy, where everybody should really be involved, we have a tremendous lack of participation and inclusion of the other half of the decision makers group is commonly not there. And I think that's very important to engage with everybody who's making these decisions, to have a more informed decision across the board. And that's part of what we're looking to do in being a part of Advancing Women in Calgary. Apart from the fact that it's a marvelous conference to attend, it's very inspiring, and it's a great place to network and what have you. But I think the big drive for us is really to reach out to the women that are, coming out to these conferences and what have you, to make that connection and to start to build a little bit more confidence to step into some of these different roles, and to feel comfortable with saying, I want to be at the table for those conversations. And just to take it back to that extremely basic, I go out to make visits with farms, and many times it's just the gentleman of the farm,
Okay.
the farmer, a son, and very rarely a daughter or a wife. So I'd say maybe 20 or 30% of our conversations involve more decision makers at the table, and many of them don't.
Okay.
So this is a great forum for us to be able to reach out to the other part of the family or the other part of those farm teams.
Okay.
So that's a large part of why we're here.
Excellent. That is great.
Do you want my take on that?
Do I want your take on that? Of course I do.
If you recall what I said, why were we here? Why were we talking about gross margins and labor, power, and machinery? What's that got to do with farm women, right?
Yes.
And it's a reasonable question. And if you saw what we tried to do is having sort of itemized and described those three main areas, right? Those then became our tables, right? So who's at the gross margin table? So what are the key roles that go towards that tremendously important part of ultimately the profitability of that farm? It's 80% of the risk probably sits there in the gross margin. And as you saw, there's many pieces to that. There's many contributing factors that go into a gross margin, and there's many roles there. And the same with the other categories. And if you recall, I then asked the question, so can anybody see any roles in there that fit the old stereotype that you have to be big and strong and physically resilient and so on to do it? No, the industry has changed, right? That actually the old stereotypes that kind of pigeonholed men into those roles and excluded women because they weren't, they were rearing children and they were doing women's things and they weren't physically strong, no longer applies because technology of all types, technology in terms of lifting heavy things right through to actually how are we going to manage farms in the next 50 years? Well, technology, right? We're going to use it, right? And as I said, you neither have to be physically present 24/7 to do that, and you don't have to be physically strong, right? The important muscle, right, that's going to matter for you and your children is what's between the ears now, right? And that's a completely level playing field. I'm not saying that the men and women necessarily think alike, but there's no difference in intelligence and ability to assimilate and use data, right? So I think that's really exciting about the industry because actually every farm in Canada, every farm in the civilized world just doubled its potential workforce.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
So there's no excuse anymore, in my view, to leave women out of that discussion and out of that management. And I feel quite passionate about it because it's an exciting time.
Yeah, that's fantastic. You gave me chills with that one. That is really good. I mean, I look back to farming in my grandfather's age. Wow, that was different than our farm and how we operate now. And because of technology and because the machinery is just so slick, it is just so much easier for a 5'2", I'm not going to give my weight, a petite little female. I can operate many things and I can be at the table because a lot of it is technology driven or brain operated, right?
Yeah,
sure. Yeah. That's excellent. Okay. During the presentation, you guys just shared so many gold nuggets of knowledge, and I could tell that it comes from so many years of working with farmers and so many farm discussions at different farm tables. And one of the ones I wanted you guys to jump on is getting a seat at the table anywhere in life. Let's even outside of farming, if you want to do something. But here, let's talk about that. If you are part of a farm family and you want to have a bigger part of it, what words of wisdom would you share with that individual?
So I think I alluded to the idea, and this would apply in any walk of life, whether it's a seat at the farm table or a career or another goal and so on, is being... You have to be a little bit unreasonable. I use the quote, right? All progress depends upon the unreasonable man, which my best friend reminds me about frequently. But it's true. There's a certain amount of truth in it, right? So, these things, the seat at the table won't necessarily come find you.
Okay.
Right? I mean, if you're lucky, maybe it will, right? But so you're masters of your own destiny. We all are, right? And so you have to be prepared to ask. But before you ask, you better be clear about what it is that you want. It's kind of like, the planning, the abbreviated little planning process we put everybody through today, which is, well, sort that out. Understand what that seat is that you want and what value you're going to bring to it before you ask for it, right?
Perfect.
And you may have to prove it.
Right.
And a necessary part of that is understanding what you start with, right? That's why we did the SWOT analysis, right?
Okay.
So, I want to be the agronomist. Well, that's great, right? I know nothing about agronomy, right? So I need to address that first, or nobody's going to see any value in that. I could ask, and I'm not going to get that role, right? So just sort of thinking it through from beginning to end, right? Before you decide who you're going to ask and how and what you're going to ask for, right? So.
I love that. And you know what? Call that common sense, I think. To me, anytime in business or on the farm, if I want to do something, I go and research and I go and learn. So let's say whether I'm male or female and I'm on the farm and I really want to step up and prove that I have value, I should probably come and say, hey, I've taken a course in financial management online or in the community, or just research, or hey, this is what I know, so that people can trust you too, right? Because
it goes to commitment too, and that's
Yeah.
a necessary part in delegation and so on. Is this person committed, not just qualified, but do they really want this? What have they invested personally in it, right?
And I'm going to go off a little bit on a tangent here, thinking as I don't have children, but if I had children, what would I want to see in them? And maybe what I coach. If I was a great parent, I'd say, hey, I want you guys to take over the farm. Let's teach you this thing. But sometimes we don't have that. But if they came to me and said, hey, Mom, I want to take over the farming operation. And, I've really been working on this and this. Wow, good job. You're really bringing something to the table. And I know you're serious about that. Kind of that concept?
Right, but so that's a child that's been raised in a family that can communicate about those things, right?
True.
And the biggest barrier.
Right.
The biggest barrier to seats at the table and succession and all of that, that whole complex, right, that I've ever seen is the poor communication, right? And not every, families don't come preloaded, able to communicate. It's not a reasonable expectation.
True.
Some do. We had a gal sat in here who obviously comes from a family that actually has a very open culture, right? They can talk about that stuff. But my experience is families that have difficulty with that. Probably why I got called in, right? And that's all I ever did was get that process flowing, give them tips and skills and so on and they could start talking about the big plan, right? Because unless and until you can do that, nothing's going to happen. Things will just stay the same, right? Yeah. So communication is absolutely key. And if you're not good at it, get some help. Nothing to be ashamed of. It's quite
nice.
And
common.
I think as well, trying to identify common goals helps everybody to know where we're headed together.
Okay.
The concept of, if we know where we're headed, we understand your motivations, really changes how all different efforts are perceived. So that writing down, talking about, really discovering what everybody's joint goals are, there's some pretty common themes there, as we've talked about as well. People don't want to fight. Some people might, but most people don't want to fight.
Right.
And most people want the farm family or the farm legacy to continue. So if we can understand how we're contributing to that legacy as opposed to I want to be in charge of whatever thing, it really changes the conversation around what we're attempting to achieve. I can bring great value here or there, or I'm really excited about getting involved with this or that piece of the operation. Reframes the conversation a little bit for people of every generation. The older generation may not feel as excited about somebody taking it over, but when they view it as this is part of the legacy, this is part of how this legacy will continue, I think that really helps with that conversation. And then my second point really is accountability. It's about what you're prepared to do, as Jonathan was describing. Do you understand what you're looking to do? Know what it is for yourself. Go figure some stuff out before you jump in. But step up, right? If you want to do something, make a plan. Express that desire. Show your value. The commitment that you demonstrate by going out and defrosting water when it's cold really changes the I want to do X conversation. So I think there's lots of different aspects to it and lots of different steps, but ultimately it starts with me. I want to, I can, I'm going to demonstrate this
Right, and holding
value.
yourself accountable above all, right?
Get it done,
Yeah.
right? Like, demonstrate the commitment to those major goals that everybody can agree on. Really makes things a lot easier in that conversation.
That's excellent.
Gail touches on a really important point there, and we talked about it earlier, and we've all heard stories about successions that went wrong, right? Those families that got torn apart and they don't talk to each other anymore. And,
Unfortunately,
and that's
yes.
acutely painful when that happens. And families that lost their farms as a result of the war that broke out in the family.
Yep.
I guarantee every one of those families had those same two goals, right? They started out, the legacy is really important. We want this to stay in the family, and we don't want any fights. And yet that's what they got. Right? They're all good, well-meaning people, and that was a really important goal. And somewhere along the way, they lost the plot and they didn't get help. And it comes down to communication in almost every single case, right? That broke down so badly that actually they got the polar opposite of the two most important goals, right?
Yeah,
in their
lost
lives,
the relationship
right?
and the farm.
Yeah, they lost the relationships and the farm. And if ever you would ask them, they would have said, I'll sooner sacrifice the farm than the relationships. Everybody's very clear about that. And yet, that's where it went wrong. The relationships went first, and then the farm followed usually. Right? And that's desperately sad, right?
Yeah.
To get so far into that you can't see the wood for the trees anymore, and it just follows its course, and you're another statistic. So, unless you're really good at that communication, well, no, but get help. Get help, right? Because it was needless in every case.
Yeah. Wow. And you know what I just keep on hearing is communication.
Totally.
You got to communicate. Nobody can read your thoughts. If you're on the farm operation and you have big dreams and plans and you want to do this, and sometimes it's all in our head. And
how is anybody going to help you with that unless
Right.
you communicate it to them, right? And if
Right.
they help you, you're more likely to achieve it.
Yeah. How many times, and I'm sure I'm guilty of it too, it's our narrative in our brain every single day. It's our dream. And we think about it and we know how bad we want it. And because they love us and they're around us, they got to feel what's in here and
They
know
must
what's
know.
in here,
But did
right?
you ever tell them? Well, no.
Did we tell them? Yeah. Did we tell our parents how interested we are in the farm and what we wanted to do? So, oh my goodness, it's all just...
So you remember what I said, right? In the absence of the communication, assumptions will jump in, right?
Right.
Well-meaning assumptions, but
Yes.
but often wrong.
Right.
That doesn't help.
We just
No.
make up our own story,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Wow. You know what? I think that was amazing words of wisdom for our audience. So thank you guys so much for joining us, talking about a seat at the table and what you need to bring to that, some ideas. That was great discussion. And again, I'm excited to provide our audience with links to those videos so that they can go and jump in and learn about the nitty-gritty stuff, I call it, and have that knowledge and that starting point for wanting to join that conversation, wanting that seat at the table. So thank you guys so much for
Thank you,
joining
Tracy.
us.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. And thank you guys for joining us. See you next time.
You've been listening to Impact Farming. For more great episodes and articles designed to help you manage and grow your farming operation, head on over to farmmarketer.com. Don't forget to sign up while you're there. We will see you on the next episode.